There were two faces of Crazy Eddie. The one America saw was a comedian named Jerry Carroll. He appeared in hundreds of commercials, hair wild, arms waving, screaming into the camera about prices that were insane. That was the word he used every time. Insane. And it worked because Carroll was genuinely magnetic and because the stores delivered on the promise. Cheap electronics, in stock, in neighborhoods people actually lived in. The face America did not see was Eddie Antar. He ran the business, he built the brand, and for years he was running something else alongside it. A second set of books that described a company that did not quite exist. That gap between the face on the television and the numbers in the ledgers is where this story actually begins. Crazy Eddie opened in Brooklyn in the late 1960s and grew steadily through the 1970s and into the 1980s. By the time Carroll's commercials became a fixture of New York television, the chain had expanded across the metro area. The stores were loud and functional and relentlessly focused on price. Customers came back. The brand became trusted. But according to court records and the later testimony of cooperating witnesses, including Sam Antar, Eddie's cousin, who served as the company's chief financial officer and eventually cooperated with federal prosecutors, the fraud had been running since the early years. Long before Crazy Eddie became a public company, long before Wall Street was involved, the mechanism was cash skimming. Money came into the registers. Not all of it entered the official books. The revenue was real. The record of it was not. Transactions were processed, cash was handled, and a portion of what came in was quietly diverted before it was counted. The company reported less revenue than it actually generated. Profits looked lower. Tax obligations shrank. And money moved into accounts the government did not know existed. This is one of the oldest forms of retail fraud and one of the hardest to detect in its early stages, because the evidence of what did not happen is very difficult to find. A register does not record the transaction that was never entered. For years, the fraud at Crazy Eddie served a straightforward purpose. It was about keeping money out of sight, running a family business the way some family businesses have always been run, with the official numbers understating reality. That arrangement worked while the company stayed private. And then everything changed. In 1984, Crazy Eddie completed an initial public offering on the NASDAQ stock exchange. This is the turn that changes everything about the story. Before the IPO, the Antar family had a reason to make the company look smaller than it was. The fraud was about hiding profits. After the IPO, that incentive reversed completely. Public investors do not pay premiums for a company hiding its earnings. They pay premiums for a company that is growing, and growth in a public company is measured in one place: the financial statements, filed quarterly with the SEC, audited annually by an outside firm, read by analysts, trusted by shareholders, priced into the stock. According to prosecutors and court records, once Crazy Eddie was a public company, the family stopped skimming cash the way they had before, which meant the reported revenue went up. That increase looked from the outside like genuine growth. The stock attracted interest. Analysts covered it. The price climbed. But the apparent growth was not sustainable on its own. And so, prosecutors alleged, the family began building on it with a different kind of manipulation. Not hiding money this time. Manufacturing numbers. To understand how this worked, it helps to understand one thing about retail businesses. In retail, inventory is not just product on shelves. It is a number investors trust. When a retailer reports strong inventory levels, it is telling shareholders, we have assets, we have product, we have the basis for future sales. Inventory appears on the balance sheet. It is part of how a retail company demonstrates its size and position. And in the mid 1980s, during a period of rapid consumer electronics growth, a chain with expanding inventory was a chain that looked like it was winning. According to court records and the accounts of cooperating witnesses, Crazy Eddie's reported inventory in the post IPO period was significantly larger than its actual inventory. The inflation took several forms. Items were added to inventory counts that were not present. Product was moved between stores before auditors arrived to count it, so the same merchandise could be counted more than once. Merchandise that had been returned or was no longer in stock was left in the reported figures as if it were still an active asset. Prosecutors also alleged that funds were moved from overseas accounts to inflate the company's reported cash position. What each manipulation had in common was this: it altered the inputs that auditors and analysts were working from. It described a company that was larger and more financially stable than the one that existed, which brings us to the part of this story that matters most. The audits happened. Maine Herdman, and later Pete Marwick Maine, conducted the annual audits, firms that would eventually merge to become part of KPMG. The process existed. The sign-offs occurred. The reports were filed with the SEC. The problem was not that nobody looked at the books. The problem was that the books had been constructed to pass the kind of examination that was being conducted. An auditor does not walk into every store, open every box, and rebuild the company from zero. Auditing depends on samples, records, counts, and assumptions. And most of those assumptions begin with one fragile idea. Management is trying to tell the truth. When management provides inventory counts prepared to produce a specific outcome, the audit encounters something that looks like evidence, physical product, documented figures, records that correspond to what the auditors expected to find. The fraud was not designed to be invisible. It was designed to be legible, to produce, under examination, a picture of a company that was performing. The records made Crazy Eddie appear to be a retail success story. And under the system that existed for reviewing those records, they were accepted as substantially accurate. By 1987, the gap between the reported numbers and the actual ones had grown too large to maintain. A hostile takeover attempt brought outside scrutiny to the company's books. Investors who examined the records closely began finding inconsistencies. The picture that Crazy Eddie's filings had presented started coming apart. The stores began closing. Operations contracted. In June 1989, Crazy Eddie filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Later that year, the chain was liquidated. After federal charges and court orders, Antar fled to Israel in 1990. He was arrested there in 1992 and returned to the United States in 1993 to face federal charges. He later pleaded guilty to racketeering conspiracy in connection with his role at Crazy Eddie. Sam Antar, who had constructed much of the post-IPO accounting scheme as chief financial officer, cooperated with federal investigators. He later spoke publicly and at length about the mechanics of the fraud, how the inventory figures were inflated, how the cash position was manipulated, how the audits were navigated. He is an unusually detailed source on the inner workings of a financial fraud, in part because he helped design it. Crazy Eddie is not simply a story about a family that stole money and got caught. What makes it worth examining is the mechanism. The fraud did not succeed by avoiding scrutiny. It succeeded by performing well under scrutiny. The inventory counts looked like inventory counts. The filings looked like filings. The audits produced reports that were signed, submitted, and filed with regulators. Every piece of the system that is supposed to generate trustworthy financial information about a public company operated as designed. The numbers were simply wrong. And they were wrong in ways constructed to survive the review that was coming. Enron followed, WorldCom, Wirecard, others, different industries, different methods, different scales. But the structure underneath those stories has something in common with Crazy Eddie. Public companies report their own numbers. Those numbers are audited. The audits are trusted. The entire system depends on the assumption that the people producing the numbers are trying to describe reality accurately. When that assumption fails, the reports still get filed. The audits still get signed. The stock still trades. Everything continues to look normal. The commercials were loud. The fraud was quiet. And the system was built to trust the quiet part. That's why.